This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.
Well, hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of When Science Speaks. Today's episode is brought to you by Bayer Strategic Consulting in Washington, D.C., which helps scientists and engineers clearly communicate the real-world impact of their work to funders, policymakers, and the public in jargon-free, engaging descriptions that distill without dumbing down. It is such a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Mary Foley Phillips to the show today. Mary's mission is to empower women to take control of their destinies and make decisions according to their values, with the ultimate goal of growing the pipeline of strong women business leaders, women sitting on governance and scientific advisory boards, and women business mentors. Currently developing a women's and non-binaries entrepreneurship program, Mary previously worked for 15 years at two Research One universities, Oregon Health and Science University and Oregon State University, where she served as Associate Director for Commercialization and Corporate Development and then Director for Research Development. In 2016, Mary shifted gears to pursue a new path, volunteering as a mentor for the OSU Accelerator Program and also for the Foundry Collective, putting to use her experience in intellectual property, market research, negotiation, theater, and fundraising. Mary launched her own company, Qualtura Biotechnology, a microbiome high-throughput culturenomics enterprise, in partnership with two leading OSU research faculty. The business failed, but Mary accomplished a personal goal of becoming personally involved with microbiome research and being a founder in search of funding. In addition to serving as entrepreneur in residence at Foundry Collective, Mary is co-founder and development director at Portal Theater in Corvallis, Oregon, and co-founder of Qualtura Biotech. Mary earned her Ph.D. in physical chemistry at Imperial College London and her B.S. in chemistry at University of Durham. Welcome to the show, Mary. Thank you so much for being here.
And thank you for having me, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, you're very active in your 500 Women Scientists chapter in Oregon and have started creating monthly pub talks on scientific topics. I'm interested to hear what your motivation was for creating these opportunities and just how they've been going.
Oh, the TAP talks are a lot of fun. It landed in my lap by accident in many ways. The TAP talks at one of the local breweries had been going for a few years. It was organized by a couple of graduate students. They graduated and they put a note out on the Facebook group for the 500 Women Scientists if anybody wanted to pick it up. So I put my hand up and said, hey, this would be great for, getting, our members out there and giving TAP talks or pub talks on a regular basis. And so everybody looked at me and said, okay, you can do that. So that's how that happened.
Uh-huh.
So we started those in November, and we do them every first Tuesday. And the audience has been growing every month since then.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just been a delight to run those. I love emceeing the TAP talks and organizing the speakers and helping them to get prepared to actually give these talks. So.
Yeah, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that kind of that preparation process, and if anything has surprised you. It sounds like it's really being well received. There's a lot of interest around it. Anything that surprised you about the talks?
Partly one of my frustrations before for a number of pub talks is sometimes there's too much on the slide when they give presentations. So decided to actually start practicing the talks with the speakers beforehand. And I was kind of like expecting to get pushback and say, no, I'm fine, I'm doing my thing. But instead they said, oh, thank you so much. And so they'd come over one or two times before the talk and we'd run through their slides and run through their talk and just change things up, sort of remove out some of the fluff stuff from the beginning, because the goal of the TAP talks is to engage the public. and it's very much of a show. And they're a lot of fun. So that's also one of the things that's also helped for some of the speakers is recognizing I'm not standing up in a seminar at a conference or in front of my peers. This is the public, and I have something to share with them and give to them. And so they have a lot of fun.
And actually, thinking about it, I'm sort of imagining the scene and in one of the TAP talks, and I'm wondering about the reaction from other patrons, at the pub, like, hey, what's going on? Like, what is this? I might be, this sounds kind of interesting. Like, what have you seen with respect to just the other folks who happen to be out for a, Thursday night or whatever it is, drink, and then all of a sudden they didn't realize this interesting talk about whatever the topic is going on.
It's been growing. The first one we did was a surprise, I think, for a lot of people who had come in for a quiet drink. Mm-hmm. And the acoustics in this bar are horrible, really horrible. Uh-huh. So it's very much you have to be guerrilla tactics on speaking. But since that first one, people have been doing a lot of social media. People are aware now that every first Tuesday there's a pub talk. So people are actually showing up intentionally to come to the talk. Uh-huh. And, one of the last talks we did, we had over 100 people in this pub, just all watching. And I loved at the end doing the Q&A, a woman stood up on a chair in the very far back corner to yell out a question. So that was a lovely moment of actually knowing that we'd actually engaged the entire audience.
Yeah, that is fantastic. So interesting. In addition to what you're doing with the TAP Talks, you also are a leader in research development, as I mentioned in the intro, for many, many years. Putting together teams, going after grants, and other things. I'm wondering if you found, as you were working in RD, if you found any sort of consistent grant winners, if there were any commonalities that, say, faculty had in the way they presented or their writing or anything like that, any commonalities that consistent grant winners had?
Oh, very much so. There are 2 or 3 qualities that are really important. The grant proposal itself is a sales pitch, and it's telling a story. And faculty who very successful at winning major grants, they know how to tell that story. So it engages the reviewers, so that they read through it, and they read all of it, and they have to fund it at the end because they want to know how it's going to end.
How does this story end?
Yeah, so it's like, got to fund it. And that's kind of like the goal of how you develop an arc for a major research proposal.
Beautiful.
But the other part of it too is being well connected. These people know program managers. They've had discussions before. They have a lot of street cred. They're well respected as thought leaders in their field. So they've developed many relationships. A number of them that I came across as well would be sitting on scientific advisory boards for businesses. So they'd actually been through the whole pitch, how to match, a request for funding with what is the market need, or it might be in the case of the federal government need. So they've learned how to match the two together. And they've also learned how to play that game of being able to steer what RFP, requests for proposals, should look like, what the topics should be, because they've created those relationships. So it's not that different from the entrepreneurial world, really.
Right. Well, I want to get to the entrepreneurial world and all the experience that you've had there. I wanted to ask a follow-up about this kind of maybe critical success factors of grant winners, and wondering, given what you've said, and you've identified some real, things to think about to be successful, for the other folks who maybe are not, are not doing those things and maybe are not getting the type of funding or the consistent funding that they would like. How do you work with those folks and say kind of like, we sort of know the recipe more or less, and, you've just done a great job describing it, relationship management and the narrative and things like that. And so, how can I help you, so to speak, if you're an RD, like how can an RD leader help faculty kind of think about their own proposals in that way?
So where I am now, I think through that is first identifying, I call it identify your own clear purpose. Mm-hmm. And that is really just the simple question of what can I do that is useful in relationship to other people or something mm-hmm. else. Mm-hmm. That's just the pure definition of purpose. And it helps to actually really sort of dig in to actually understand what that means for you as an individual before you start trying to shoehorn yourself into something else. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense. So it's this actual process really also helps to find the passion of what you really want to be doing, what you really want to be working on. This also becomes part and parcel of how you show up in the digital world, how you reach out maybe in social media or LinkedIn or ResearchGate, and you start being consistent, but also very authentic about who you are and what you are and what you're trying to do. Mm-hmm. And then also how you show up for networking in the real world. And how you come across. But I started, thinking through for especially people I mentor now, of thinking about what is it that you truly want to do, not what you think you should do or what everybody's telling you you should mm-hmm. go after, but really identify what's in your heart to do, because that passion will come through mm-hmm. In everything you do. And mm-hmm. you'll be happy actually doing the research that you're going to do, or happy doing the business that you want to create, not something that suddenly becomes a dead weight.
Right. You'll look forward to it. It gets you up in the morning going, energized.
Yeah. So then people have their own story.
Mary, I've talked a lot to entrepreneurs, and it's wonderful to have you as an entrepreneur on the show, and wondering what lessons you feel you've learned as a startup founder, and maybe what you might do differently, if anything, were you to start another company in the future. Any kind of advice that you have for listeners who are thinking about becoming entrepreneurs or are entrepreneurs now and wondering how they can increase their success?
One of the first steps I feel to be important, and I learned this by my own mistakes, is to actually set yourself up to be a recognized thought leader in that field. Mm-hmm. And be really rock solid confident in that, because customer discovery requires going out and talking to a lot of people and different customer segments, getting feedback from them, and that's a relationship building process.
Right.
You have to get them to talk to you and to provide information. And it's if you are a thought leader in your field, then people will happily share and talk with you. For Qualtura, I didn't have a background in microbiology. So that, people would like, oh, do you have publications? Where are you from? My two co-founders did, but they didn't want to be the ones going out to do the customer discovery.
Oh, I see.
So it's a part of, how you build your team as well, and who's going to be sort of like the face and who's going to be doing the outreach and making those connections. Becomes something that you need to think about as well, because the first steps are really sort of getting out there and making a lot of connections. Social media helps a lot with that too, even in the sciences, and an area that's actually harder for women, I've discovered, to actually go out and promote.
Wait, could you talk a little bit about that, about the challenges you face? And I also wanted to have a follow-up question about your co-founders in the company who were not as comfortable, who did not want to sort of go out and be the face. But I wonder if there are any things that you would like to highlight with respect to women entrepreneurs who are out there, and what they're facing, and maybe ways to overcome obstacles that really don't affect men the same way.
Oh, there's a question. You have to, one of the things mentored through it is you have to know and own your own value is the first part. And be, as I say, have that clear purpose so that you're confident. It's not about you, it's about the bigger world that you're trying to affect. And it's like helping people get over that worry. There was a paper in Nature last week which was talking about promotion of papers that male scientists will quite readily put in spectacular research and novel ideas and all this kind of stuff, and go for things that know that the media outlets will pick up, so that they'll get much broader coverage.
Sure.
And a lot of women I know, they would never dream of doing that.
Right.
It's
Self-promotion.
Yeah, and would never do it. And it's like, how do we combat that? Because you need to be able to be seen and heard,
right?
And you have to, and all this noise of stuff that's happening in social media and the news and what gets picked up and hits the headlines. How do you make sure that you rise to the top to be seen? And what do we need to do to actually promote the women entrepreneurs? It's also, there are so few as well that when we do hit the headlines as well, we're either brilliant or we're terrible.
That's the news. This person is an outlier one way or the other.
Yeah. And it's just a statistics problem. So it's getting more and more women to be out there, thinking about being entrepreneurs, and being part of that ecosystem will help tremendously. Scientists and entrepreneurs have all the same traits in common. That they're all curious, self-inspiring, perseverant, tenacious, resilient. They've got all of those. They're both. I like the definition, the literal definition of entrepreneur, which is like between holding, and it's like you reach. It's an active thing of trying to reach for either for new knowledge or for a new market. They're both striving to sort of bridge a gap. So they're very similar in many ways, and we need more women to actually be out there, sort of trying to bridge that gap very actively.
And that's so true. And I love how you highlighted the sort of the differences there with respect to self-promotion. It's almost like it's that has a negative connotation, perhaps, self-promotion, unless of course it's true. You are an expert. It's being comfortable with that expertise or that role as a thought leader, and then wanting to share that with the broader public, maybe is a way of looking at it that doesn't carry any kind of judgment attached to it. Maybe that's what you think about it.
The 500 Women Science Group is great for that too, because we can agree to promote each other, and so and that's okay. Right.
Someone else does it. Yeah. Right. It's funny. An anecdote, actually, a grandfather once said, you get a compliment, and he would say, "Oh, you're just saying that because it's true." And it was sort of like, it's a fact. You happen to be an expert. And sometimes, in addition to reminding people that or highlighting it, having others say it about you is maybe more can be more comfortable, at least in the beginning too. And the other question was, you mentioned that your colleagues in the company who had this deep subject matter expertise in microbiology did not want to go out and engage with the customers or potential customers in the marketplace as much. Was, as I look at that, I wonder, why is that? Was it something just, more logistical and schedule related, or was there something else there that led them to just not want to have that kind of interaction?
Partly it's just having enough time as well. Both full-time faculty members, they've got their own labs, they've got graduate students, so they're really busy. Steve, love Steve. He is, when you talk to him about microbiology, you just fall into his world. It's just glorious. And he's happy in that world. I've learned so much from him. But it was just more for them having just time. And Tom had just had his third baby, so
you see why that might take up some time as well.
So it's not, we might ramp that back up at some point later in time. When I talk about being a thought leader, one of the things that became important for me is that I had to ask the right questions. And so when I was doing customer discovery and trying to work out product market fit, there were some questions in my head that I knew I had questions, but I didn't know what the question was. So I ended up actually finding some people at the end by going to a meeting in DC last September, where I actually found that what people were telling me was true. They needed standards, but they actually needed something else. And so I would have got there faster if I'd known the science better. So that's one of the, it doesn't mean you can't do it if you're not an expert in that particular field. It just makes it a lot harder.
Great. Well, these have been such important insights, Mary. I think they're really going to help both inspire people to do events like TAP Talks and connect with 500 women scientists. I mean, there are chapters. Are there chapters across the country?
There are. I think almost every major city has one. There's about 30,000 women in the 500 women group now, globally. So yeah, there are pods. It's a whale thing, all around the country. We've got another one down in Eugene. There's one up in Portland, Oregon. We've got a big one in DC. So they do good work as well.
And we'll definitely have the information about how to find a 500 Women Scientists chapter in your location. Dr. Mary Foley Phillips, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. You're doing a lot of really interesting things. And actually, before you get to one thing I didn't ask you as I'm thinking about your leadership in theater. And I'm wondering how that may in some way influence, inform, help shape how you talk about your scientific work.
So Portal Theatre is really a experiment in creative entrepreneurship with my husband. He teaches theatre. And it was a frustration for him. It began with that this educational system just teaches the students to basically go out and beg for a job in either regional or national theatre when they graduate. And it was like, how can we create something where they can create their own art and make a living doing that? So what I'm doing now ties to that as well, but it's more in the sciences. But one of our biggest productions that has done really well was called Nobels, and it was stories about women in science. And that was picked up nationwide and on tour for a long time.
Wow.
So nice write-ups for that. But that was the way to, how to make the world realize that all these amazing women scientists out there doing amazing work. And that began on that project because I'd just come back from an ACS meeting, American Chemical Society meeting, and I had a T-shirt with these women scientists on the front. And the company members said, "Who are they?" And they went, "I've never heard of these people." And so that's what inspired them to put this play together.
Wow. So cool. Thanks for telling that story. Dr. Mary Foley Phillips, thank you again. It's been fantastic to chat with you, and I appreciate you sharing all this really interesting information. We're going to have links to these various resources that you talked about in the show notes. And listeners, thank you for being here for this episode of When Science Speaks. And I hope to see you back next week for another episode of When Science Speaks.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe. Check us out on the web at whensciencespeaks.com, and we'll see you next time.